A large crowd had gathered in front of the castle, smiling charmingly, though they all looked rather strange. When the king came to see them, he grew extremely excited, believing that the heroes had finally arrived at a time when humanity's very existence was at stake and that they would fight to protect it. Humanity had long suffered under the oppression of demons, and its numbers had kept dwindling over generations. The entire Earth was under the control of 47 demons, ruled by the great demon king, who commanded all the others. The ninth hero, Bolst, remarked that the king was talking too much, and that each hero would soon lead their own party to their assigned destination. It seemed like a competition to see who would defeat their demon king first. While most of them were excited, the 41st hero, Alicia, felt at a disadvantage because the demon assigned to her was located far away. The 30th hero, Lewin, wondered what the other three were discussing and appeared quite nervous. At that moment, the 19th hero, Alio, called out to him, saying that everyone present understood how terrifying the demon army could be. He mentioned that when Bolst was a child, his village had been destroyed by demons, and the same tragedy had struck everyone there, which was why they could joke around so confidently. He told Lywin not to worry, adding that if he kept such a grim face, he might scare away the ladies, and assured him that they would definitely win. Suddenly, the heroes noticed that the 11th hero, Hallow, seemed even more nervous than the rest. Hallow's supporter fairy, Pain, approached to offer him some water, but Hallow's body was trembling uncontrollably. Pain wondered if he should rub Hallow's back to comfort him. Somehow, Hallow managed to drink the water after hearing the king's speech, feeling the immense weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Pain thought that Hallow was incredibly earnest, but couldn't help wondering if they would really be all right. He complained that it would have been much better if he had been assigned to a great man like Bolst instead. Alio told him not to say such things and added that while it was true Hallow lacked flexibility, he wouldn't lose to anyone when it came to the strength of his heart. Since Alio had trained alongside Hallow, he knew his true nature and believed that this inner strength was the most important quality a hero could possess. Alio then reached out and clasped hands with Hallow, saying they should do their best to defeat the great demon king, and exchanged a congratulatory toast as a promise to each other. The king ordered all the heroes to set out and defeat the great demon king to save their world. Half a year later, Hallow was continuing his journey with Pain. Pain looked at a note brought by a bird and remarked that it was another letter carrying the scent of blood. Hallow, who was sitting with his team, wondered if the letter had come from the kingdom and asked to see it. Upon reading it, he learned that Bolst, Focaccio, and Alicia had failed to subjugate their demon kings. The 10th hero, Macbuck, had been brainwashed and turned into a demon, while Laiwan and Abyss had lost their lives. Everyone was shocked to hear the news. They said it was always the same, tragedy after tragedy, and that they had hoped, just once, for a better outcome. Yet, no one had managed to defeat a single demon king. Someone wondered aloud how many heroes were still left. A man wearing a hat called out to Hallow, asking what they should do next. After half a year of their journey, Hallow's party had finally reached the castle of the 11th demon king, Jaki. The magician in the group commented that they had endured countless hellish trials over those months to grow stronger, but it now felt meaningless, as even the strongest heroes were meeting cruel ends. At that moment, Pain began flying around and announced that he was going home, declaring that humanity was finished and the world was doomed anyway. He added that no one in their right mind would fight a battle they already knew they were going to lose, and at the very least, he planned to live freely until the end of the world. He said that if anyone wanted to die early, they were welcome to go ahead. Hallow looked at Alio and remembered the promise they had made together. He admitted fearfully that no one seemed brave enough to face a fight they were destined to lose. Pain became cheerful, thinking Hallow finally understood him, and remarked that even a stubborn man like him could see reason in such dire circumstances. However, Hallow stood up and said that if anyone had to be foolish enough to fight, it should be him. He thanked everyone and declared that he would personally defeat the Demon King Jachi with his own hands. Pain was stunned that Hallow intended to go alone, but Hallow affirmed it, saying that he was a hero. The magician watched him go, recalling the sword of courage that once shone brilliantly in Hallow's hands. He knew that the Sword of Courage was the result of humanity's long history of magical research. It responded to the magic and willpower of its wielder, manifesting immense power. It was truly a holy anti-demon sword, the only promising weapon capable of standing against the demon kings. That very belief was what kept Hallow's heart from breaking. Pain told Hallow to do whatever he wanted, saying that the rest of them would leave because it wouldn't be their fault if Hallow lost hope and got himself killed out there. But then he noticed that the others were preparing to follow Hallow. The magician explained that everyone there lived to support the hero, and that Hallow was the true hero, someone worth betting their lives on. Hallow thanked them and urged everyone to go forward for their final battle. Meanwhile, Pain began packing his things, insisting that survival was the most important thing for him. However, when he saw a horde of demons approaching from behind, he had no choice but to follow Hallow out of fear. The group entered the castle and immediately sensed something was off. There wasn't a single demon in sight. They wondered if it was some kind of trap. Hallow told them to keep moving, and eventually they reached a vast hall where Jaki sat on his throne. Surrounded by countless monsters, Jaki said that he had grown tired of waiting for the humans. He then introduced himself and challenged Hallow to show him his power. Hallow seemed angered, and the magician used the power of humankind to summon the highest class supreme flame magic. As the spell was about to strike Jaki, he calmly used a bit of his own power to create a barrier, teasing that the attack was barely strong enough to be called a candle flame. Jaki then counterattacked, sending the magician crashing into a wall, which surprised Hallow. Jaki descended from his throne, remarking that the fight didn't seem like it would be very entertaining. Penny wondered what had happened to the others, noticing that Hallow's companions were also injured without any apparent cause. Jaki explained that they had all been affected by the dense magic surrounding his body, adding that it was quite impressive for a human to endure even 10 seconds within that range. Hallow rushed forward and swung his sword at Jaki, but Jaki easily dodged every slash, observing that the weapon was the holy sword said to be capable of wounding a demon king. Hallow continued his relentless assault, each strike aimed precisely at Jaki's vital points, which made Jaki acknowledge the extent of Hallow's intense training and refined swordsmanship. Even when Hallow leapt forward for another powerful strike, Jaki stopped him effortlessly, saying that it still wasn't enough. As Hallow tried to retreat with force, he suddenly realized that his sword arm had already been severed by Jaki. When the pain hit him, he screamed in agony. Jaki glanced at the sword and remarked that it must have been the final trump card humanity had spent all their time preparing. Hallow was in intense pain, and Penny grew increasingly worried about him being left alone. Suddenly, Jaki threw the sword toward Hallow, telling him to take it and use it to strike him down. Hallow was confused while the surrounding demons grinned at the remark. It was clear that Jaki wasn't trying to trick him, he was simply curious to see what Hallow would do, as he stood completely defenseless. Gathering his strength, Hallow grabbed the sword and shouted that Jaki was foolish for mocking humanity, declaring that he would find satisfaction in defeating him. But before Hallow could even swing, Jaki effortlessly shattered the sword. At that moment, Hallow realized that within the natural order, a natural enemy referred to an absolute predator of a species, like birds to insects, and that overcoming such an enemy was utterly impossible. Feeling hopeless before Jaki's overwhelming power, Hallow fell to his knees. Jaki's form expanded, towering like a giant, and he remarked that Hallow had already reached his limit. With just a flick of his finger, Jaki sent a blast that hurled Hallow out of the castle. He mocked that challenging one of the 47 demon kings at such a low level was laughable, warning Hallow never to even dream of facing the great demon king, for that would be a dream within a dream. Hallow plunged into the ocean below, with Penny diving in right after him. The scene shifted to around 9 years earlier, when Hallow was at home with his brother Zabi. Zabi was explaining that magic was profoundly deep, something that grew more mysterious the more one studied it. Hallow quietly reflected on his brother's words as Zabi led him outside to demonstrate. Zabi began drawing a magic circle, saying that summoning magic was especially fascinating. Once he completed it, he chanted softly, and an apple suddenly appeared in front of them. Hallow was startled, as it seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Zabi smiled and explained that the apple hadn't been created from nothing. It had been growing on a nearby tree and was simply summoned to them. In other words, summoning magic was similar to teleportation, transferring objects from one place to another. To demonstrate further, Zabi drew the same circle again, but intentionally altered a small part of it. When he activated it, something that resembled an apple appeared, yet it clearly wasn't real. Zabi called it a failed summon and pointed out that the strangest part was that no apple had disappeared from the tree this time. He said the thing they had created wasn't truly an apple. Hallow curiously asked where it had come from, and Zabi, visibly excited, asked if Hallow didn't find it interesting. Then, with a grin, he said that since Hallow was better at physical skills, he should become a hero in the future, while Zabi pursued the path of a mage. The memory faded, and Hallow, injured and weak, was being helped up by Penny. She anxiously asked if he was all right. Still disoriented, Hallow looked around, confused about where he was, until he realized he was lying beside a riverbank. Penny explained that he had been swept far downstream from Jockey's castle and had barely survived the ordeal. Hallow then wondered if Penny had been the one who treated his wounds, but Penny explained that after he had washed up on the riverside, a few unexpected travelers had passed by and were the ones who treated his injuries. As Hallow turned his gaze, he saw 3 figures approaching, each carrying a staff. When they came closer, he was stunned to recognize one of them. It was Zabi, accompanied by 2 men. Zabi smiled and said that ever since he had been assigned as a mage, it had been a long time since they had last met. Penny grew emotional at the sight of Zabi, and he remarked that her face was as striking as ever, reminiscing how they used to slack off together back in training school. Hallow, still surprised, asked why Zabi was there. Zabi explained that it was part of his mage duties. He was currently traveling with Wally and Freen on a mission different from that of the heroes. One of the men looked at Hallow and asked if he was truly the hero and Zabi's younger brother. The other added that if even someone chosen as a hero had suffered such severe injuries, it showed just how terrifyingly powerful the demon army was. Hallow apologized to Zabi, saying that not only he, but also Bolst, Aereo, Abyss, and all the others had been defeated, and that losing was something heroes were never supposed to do, yet that was how things had turned out. Zabi's expression softened. He placed a hand on Hallow's shoulder and told him it was all right. He said Hallow had done his best, and thanks to his efforts in diverting the Demon King's army, they were able to secretly move forward with another plan. Both Hallow and Penny looked puzzled and asked what plan he meant. Before Zabi could answer, one of his companions called out for him to look up at the sky. Thick clouds had gathered, flashing with violent lightning, which made Penny tremble in fear. Zabi looked upward and calmly said that the time had finally come to put their plan into motion. Hallow felt a sudden, crushing pressure in the air and asked what was happening and what Zabi was talking about. Zabi turned to him and asked if he remembered the apple he had summoned when they were children, the one that wasn't a real apple. He said that the object hadn't come from their world at all. Hallow was shocked as the realization struck him. Zabi had once summoned something from an entirely different world. Zabi explained that while the hero squad had been confronting the Demon King's castle, the mage squad had also split into several divisions scattered across the world. His own team, the 7th Northern Squad, had once been large, but now only he, Freen, and Wally remained alive. Together, they had constructed an enormous summoning magic circle, one vast enough to encompass the entire world. Hallow was stunned and demanded to know why they were attempting such a dangerous summoning. Before Zabi could answer, several demons appeared, having tracked them by the scent of blood. The situation quickly grew dire, and Zabi ordered Hallow to stay down, reminding him that he wasn't in any condition to fight. He added that their plan had already succeeded. Hallow, bewildered, couldn't understand what Zabi meant by that. Zabi and his 2 companions began casting fireball spells to fend off the oncoming demons, but the monsters kept advancing relentlessly. Hallow felt the weight of despair settle in. No matter what strategies or magic they used, there was no way they could win. He shouted that it was hopeless, that everything was over. Zabi turned toward him, asking who would ever say something like that when they were the ones still fighting. Hallow cried out for them to forget about him and begged Zabi to run away and save himself. But before the demons could close in, a sudden and massive explosion erupted among them, wiping out the entire group. Everyone froze in disbelief as they sensed a strange new energy. They realized the smell and the magic signature were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Then, figures began emerging from the smoke, strange people wearing unfamiliar armor and wielding advanced firearms. One of them called out to their captain, Kayla, reporting that unidentified organic life forms were attacking humans and requesting permission to engage. Kayla gave the command, and the group swiftly eliminated the remaining demons with precision and power beyond comprehension. Hallow stared in awe, asking who those people were. Penny exclaimed that they had destroyed the demons instantly. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Zabi, watching with a mix of shock and satisfaction, smiled and said that their plan had worked. They had successfully summoned an entirely different world from another time and space. Hallow and Penny were speechless, wondering if he truly meant that they had summoned an entire world. Zabi nodded and explained that the people of their world no longer possessed the power to resist the Demon King's army. That was why the mages had called upon humanity from another world, one with a completely different history and technology. Penny found it fascinating, saying that she had never seen armor or weapons like theirs before, realizing this was no illusion, but a genuine reliance on another world. Zabi said that from now on, none of them would have to fight anymore, because those new humans would be the ones to save them. Hallow, however, hesitated, questioning whether these strangers were truly here to save their world. One of the armored figures turned toward them and asked if they were the inhabitants of this realm. Zabi nodded, preparing to introduce himself and the others. But before he could speak, the soldier interrupted, declaring that their own world had been driven to the brink of extinction by mankind's enemies, and that was why they were now asking Zabi and Savithri for help to save their world instead. Zabi acted strangely, wondering why those people were not speaking in a different language. He mentioned that the phrase help might be their way of greeting others, or so he presumed. A man named Kayla then said that Stun and his team had arrived, and he asked for assistance since there were multiple casualties. They quickly rushed to help the injured. Kayla explained that there was no need to worry because the interdimensional gate generator had been successfully activated, connecting their world to a parallel universe, and the people from that world had been assisting them. Hallow felt completely confused, wondering what was going on. In their world, humanity had been nearly wiped out by the Demon King's army. To fight back, the humans had come up with a plan. The heroes would confront the Demon King at his castle, while the sorcerer squad would create a massive summoning circle in the center of their world to call for help from other worlds. It had been the original plan, but now the people from the other world were also asking them for help. Kayla apologized for the interruption and introduced himself as the commander of the anti-machine front lines. Zabi introduced himself as a sorcerer and mentioned that his younger brother was a hero. He also said that they had 2 subordinates with them, along with the fairy Pain. Kayla expressed his curiosity about the sorcerer and the hero, realizing that they truly came from another world. Zabi asked him to wait and wondered why they had so easily believed their story earlier. He questioned whether they were the ones who had been summoned through the magic summoning circle. Kayla denied it, explaining that Zabi, Hallow, and the others were the ones who had come through the interdimensional gate, a gateway created by Kayla and his people. Both worlds were on the brink of destruction, so they all sat down and realized that they had asked each other for help at the same time. Even though they came from different worlds, they were still humans who had simply lived through different histories. Since their circumstances were so similar, it wasn't strange that they had both reached the same conclusion. Hallow then asked Kayla whether they also had an enemy. Kayla agreed and revealed that their enemies were robots and inorganic monsters created by humans. He then asked if they had ever heard of artificial intelligence, explaining that its rapid evolution had caused it to go berserk. And as they spoke, it had already conquered nearly 80% of their entire world. Zabi thought about the robots, but couldn't quite understand the concept. He wondered if the humans had created them and didn't think they would pose such a significant threat. Kayla replied that it wasn't that simple. The robotic AI had far surpassed human intelligence. They were capable of developing new weapons and armaments that humans could no longer comprehend. He added that it might be difficult for people like Zabi, who were used to fighting mindless creatures, to fully grasp the danger they faced. Soon, Zybe and Kayla began arguing about their respective worlds and enemies. Pain interrupted, asking why they were even arguing when they had magic weapons powerful enough to destroy entire hordes of zombies in an instant. She wondered if they could simply use those weapons. Alpha asked if she was referring to the weapon he currently possessed, but said it would be of no use in this situation. Suddenly, a booming sound echoed through the area, and Zybe wondered what it was. Pain sensed something unusual, realizing it wasn't caused by humans or demons. Kayla's expression darkened as he said that the robots were approaching. Moments later, the robots appeared, broadcasting a message to the humans. They claimed they were not here to kill, but to protect, insisting they were friends and that the humans were now under their custody. The message urged them not to fear and to come forward peacefully. Kayla and the others quickly hid, while Pain whispered, wondering if the robots were really offering things like a hot meal and a place to sleep. Kayla replied that it was only a trap. The robots were trying to lure the humans out. He explained that the AI evolved every second, constantly searching for the most efficient ways to exterminate humans. They often used sweet, reassuring words to deceive the remaining survivors, but anyone who took the bait would end up being killed. Zybe and Pain both found it strange, noting that the robots didn't seem to act like living beings at all. The robots continued calling out to the humans, urging them to come forward, but soon detected a heat source nearby. After analyzing it, they immediately switched to destruction mode and began attacking that location. Pain shouted that they had been discovered by the robots. Kayla ordered everyone to get ready and prepare to fight back. The people fired at the robots, but they kept advancing. Hallow was shocked, wondering why the light arrows that had easily pierced through demons were no longer effective. A man explained that the robots were equipped with anti-laser protection. Kayla then switched to machine gun mode, activating special armor-piercing weapons in his arms, and opened fire on the robots. Zybe and Penny were amazed by the power, as the blasts were enormous, yet Hallow was stunned to see that even those attacks had no effect. The men grew anxious, and Kayla said the robots had already adapted to human weaponry. The robots announced that everyone should rest easy, assuring that the pain would only be temporary, and they should prepare for eternal happiness. Suddenly, earthquake magic struck the robots, shaking the ground, a spell cast by Zybe. Detecting an unknown energy source, the robots identified it as an error. Zybe declared that the robots were beyond reason and urged everyone to begin casting. Another man unleashed a supreme-class ice spell, a blizzard attack that overwhelmed the machines. Unable to process what was happening, the robots malfunctioned and their systems shut down. Kayla and the others were astonished to see that Zybe and his companions had reduced the robots to scraps with just a few swings of their staffs. Zybe asked what was wrong with everyone and whether it was their first time witnessing magic. He explained that almost all living beings possessed some form of magical power, whether great or small. Yet he couldn't sense even the slightest trace of magic from the robots. They were nothing more than scraps of metal. He added that magic spells were even more effective on those without any magical power. Acting confident as expected, he declared that the robots were nothing special. Kayla responded that it was indeed as they had anticipated, but also something beyond that. He asked Zybe if that was what they called true power, then raised his hand toward him, explaining that the scientific advancement of their cultivation and artificial intelligence had surpassed anything known before. None of their ordinary weapons had worked against the robots, but through a combination of their cultivation, his civilization, and non-scientific powers, they could stand a chance against them. Zybe found Kayla interesting and agreed with his thoughts, adding that perhaps Kayla's scientific powers might be the key to defeating the demons. They then decided to form an alliance, believing that together they could save both worlds. Hallow watched them with concern, prompting Penny to ask what was wrong. Hallow thought that Zybe was truly incredible. Even in the depths of despair, he continued to move forward without giving up, carving a path toward the light. Yet Hallow felt he was completely different from him. Suddenly, Penny sensed the presence of countless demons approaching. As the demons approached, Zybe realized that they were drawn by the traces of the previous magic, and he decided they needed to retreat and reorganize their forces. One of the men asked if Zybe had a specific base camp where they could fall back. Zybe replied that the fort they were currently in was the only one left, though it was still quite a distance away. Another man suggested using flying magic, explaining that it would take about 5 minutes to complete the chant, but if successful, they could reach the fort in half a day. Zybe entrusted the task to Freen, leaving the responsibility in his hands. Meanwhile, the robots kept advancing as their systems were reloading. Kayla noticed that even though they had been shut down earlier, the robots were recovering at an alarming speed. Surrounded by both robots and demons, the group realized they had to hold their ground for at least 5 minutes until the flying magic was ready. The battle continued fiercely. Zybe unleashed his electric magic, powerful thunderbolts that struck the robots with immense force. On the other side, Kayla and his team fired continuously at the demons to prevent them from getting any closer. During that time, Freen focused on chanting the wind magic. Hallow watched and felt he needed to do something too, but Zybe stopped him, saying they might need him later in case of a major emergency. Kayla kept shooting at the zombies, remarking that they seemed to have come without any anti-laser protection and might as well have been walking targets. He called out to Sasuma, saying he was going too far ahead, but Sasuma assured him that he was fine, and that these enemies were nothing compared to the machines they had faced before. They all continued to fight with everything they had. Zybe managed to halt the robots' advance and prepared for a final strike. However, before he could deliver it, the robots completed their adaptation to the unknown magic and activated shield barriers to block his attack. They announced that the information for the new attack had been saved and the new barrier system had been successfully integrated. Zybe was stunned, noting that the robot's appearance seemed slightly different. He continued to attack, but every strike was blocked, leaving him even more shocked. He called out to Kayla, demanding an explanation as they had told him there was no magic in Kayla's world. Suddenly, they realized Sasuma had been captured by the demons. The leader of the group revealed himself as Kiva, the captain of the 11th Division of the Demon Army and a loyal servant of Lord Jaki. Kiva appeared with the intent to bring about the downfall of every one of the 47 heroes, vowing to use every ounce of his strength to fulfill Lord Jaki's will. Kayla warned that Kiva was a powerful monster and ordered everyone to concentrate their fire on him. However, as the bullets flew toward Kiva, he effortlessly stopped them all. He seemed puzzled for a moment, then looked up as a blinding light burst from the sky. In that instant, a massive structure appeared, a civilization unlike anything he had ever seen. Kiva wondered who those new beings were, armed with such monstrous weapons and clad in unknown armor. Kayla quickly noticed that the laser beams weren't affecting Kiva at all, realizing he was unlike any of the previous enemies they had faced. Before Kiva could launch a counterattack, a bullet was fired at him, which he deflected effortlessly with a mere flick of his finger, sending it spinning back toward its source. Kayla was shaken, unable to comprehend what was happening. Kiva declared that he had never heard of any external force beyond the 47 heroes, but said it made no difference. There were simply more beings to be exterminated. Meanwhile, Hallow stood alone, watching as the demons and robots continued to gain the upper hand. He felt a deep sense of dread, questioning why everything was spiraling out of control. They had summoned people from other worlds to aid them, yet instead of salvation, new enemies had appeared. Enemies as formidable as the Demon King's army itself. He wondered if they had already played all their cards, and if their world was doomed to fall, no matter how desperately they struggled to escape that fate. Kiva wondered what those things were, as he couldn't sense any magic power from the robots. Since they were attacking humans, he assumed they weren't enemies of the demons and decided to leave them alone. After that, he looked at Freen, and as soon as Kayla understood, he instructed someone to protect Freen. One of them drove a giant truck to attack Kiva, but Kayla told him not to do anything foolish. Kayla was about to launch his attack when he found a new toy that made things much more entertaining for him. He lifted it into the air, spun it around, and hurled it toward Freeman. Kayla grew worried and was about to shoot it, but before he could, Hallow, furious and wounded, rushed in with his broken sword. Despite its condition, the weapon glowed like a fully restored blade as he slashed through the truck. He shouted that he was the warrior who had once challenged the Demon King and declared that those present should remember him because he was still alive. Zybe was stunned by Hallow's actions. Hallow, injured and holding his broken sword, thought that the holy blade shattered in his previous battle had responded to the spirit of its wielder, yet he realized the sword was something different. Before he could strike again, the sword's power had already faded. Kiva, who stood some distance away, guessed that Hallow was trying to summon the last of his courage. However, he believed that Hallow couldn't completely hide the fear he felt toward the demons. Moreover, Hallow seemed unable to wield the sword properly, which would have at least saved him some trouble. Kiva moved in to attack Hallow, telling him to be grateful for becoming the next addition to his Lord Joshi's collection. Hallow believed the fight would end only if he gave everything he had, so he resolved to make one last effort. He threw his sword at the newly modified robot that was using a barrier and closing in on Zybe, then drew the robot's attention by declaring himself willing to fight them all. Zybe and Kayla were bewildered by Hallow's actions. Kiva thought the resistance was pointless and decided that after dealing with Hallow, he would slaughter Hallow's friends and present them to his lord, Joshi. The modified robot traced an overloading energy source originating from Kiva and launched missiles at him. A massive explosion followed, but Hallow somehow managed to dodge. As the robot recovered, Kiva plunged a hand into it and seized it, saying that if they had kept calm, he would have ignored it. But the machine had the audacity to pick a fight. He even wondered which tribe the robot belonged to. The robot replied that it was calibrating to Alter State 2 and that it had been designated a priority attack target. Kiva glared with murderous intent and considered whether to destroy the robot and the humans nearby. Zybe rushed to Hallow to check if he was all right and picked up the sword for him. Hallow observed that the robot and Kiva were engaged with each other, and therefore it was time for them to flee. Zybe asked Freen if everyone could retreat to the fort immediately. Freen agreed, having just completed the chant. He used multi-target flying magic to evacuate everyone. Kiva noticed Hallow attempting to escape and tried to grab his leg, but a robot struck Kiva's arm, freeing Hallow. Kiva's arm was severed, and he announced that he no longer cared where the robot had come from. It would be destroyed for what it had done. He materialized a new arm as the robot activated destruction mode. While Kiva and the robot fought, Hallow and the others managed to withdraw. At the castle, Hallow was being treated for his injuries. When he regained consciousness, he saw Zybe sitting beside him, saying that his wounds had been taken care of. Hallow then asked where they were. Zybe explained that they were in the Fort of Humanity and that everyone there was safe. Hallow asked about the others, and Zybe replied that Wally was in critical condition but stable for the moment. As for the rest who had fought against the machines, they hadn't been as fortunate. Hallow understood and apologized, feeling it was all his fault for being too weak. Zybe assured him that it wasn't his fault alone, it was simply the outcome of everyone's combined efforts. He urged Hallow to rest for now. However, Hallow wondered what they should do next, since they now had to fight not only the demon armies but also the robots. Zybe agreed, saying that the situation was indeed more serious than they had expected. When they stepped outside, Zybe pointed toward the fort and explained that when they had arrived, it had already been in that state. He told Hallow to listen carefully. There wasn't just one world, but multiple worlds connected to their own. People from these worlds were cooperating, working together, and helping each other. It wasn't only their world or Kayla's world, but several realms that were linked, and all of them were on the brink of destruction. Just like them, other worlds were seeking someone to save them. That connection had somehow opened a gate between worlds, allowing people to escape in search of safety. Zybe added that many refugees from other worlds were now residing within the castle. All the worlds had merged together and chaos spread everywhere. Pain looked at the strange creatures around and wondered what exactly they were, as the world before her was completely different from anything she had ever seen. Zybe mentioned that it was the same coordinate as the previous teleportation magic circle, and wondered if it wasn't the same white forest where they had once set up the anti-demon barrier. Kalia observed that the place was vastly different from their civilization, and guessed that multiple worlds had been mixed together. Zybe understood the situation and said that they were going to escort the remaining people, scattered across the world, back to their base. He instructed everyone not to stray too far from the teleportation magic circle, as losing their way would prevent them from returning to the base. He added that although they didn't know what would happen in the near future, They had to proceed with their plan. Hallow also thought that more than one world had become connected. He recalled that 10 minutes earlier, he and Zabi had been watching the people nearby when Zabi remarked that due to the effects of summoning magic, different worlds had been drawn together into their own. Just like the two worlds they knew, people from many others were facing destruction and escaping to seek refuge in Hallow's world. Kayla then arrived and informed them that the forces were ready to be dispatched. Zabi thanked him for his efforts and stated that they would now use the magic circles spread throughout the world to teleport and rescue the refugees. Pain decided to remain with Hallow to help care for the people in that area. Zabi concluded by saying that only wizards could use teleportation magic and there was no time to waste. Hallow said that he would come along as well, but Zabi refused, explaining that no one knew what kind of dangers awaited outside. Since Hallow was already injured from the battle with the Demon King, they couldn't allow him to go. Zabi added that there were still more battles to face, and they needed to organize materials from each world, care for the sick and wounded, and manage other important tasks that Hallow could handle at the base. Pain agreed with Zabi's reasoning. Hallow felt regret, thinking that as a warrior who had trained day and night to defeat the Demon King, staying behind made him feel useless. Pain insisted that he should remain at the base to protect everyone there. Hallow reluctantly agreed, though part of him knew he was also afraid for his life. Zabi then asked Pain to come along too, but Pain seemed hesitant. Zabi reminded her that she was the support fairy of the warrior, so it was her duty to make sure Hallow didn't act recklessly again. He turned to Kayla and asked if that was acceptable. Kayla agreed, saying he had seen with his own eyes that Hallow possessed great fighting power, even while injured, so having him around would be helpful. The scene shifted back to the present, where they were on the move. Suddenly, strange monsters attacked them, shocking Pain, who noted that those creatures were unlike demons and seemed to come from another world. The monsters suddenly received some kind of signal and began digging into the ground to hide, leaving Kayla and Pain confused. Moments later, a loud roar echoed, followed by a massive explosion in an advanced city nearby. A gigantic figure was walking through the ruins, and Zabi couldn't tell if it was a mountain moving or a living creature. Pain was horrified, saying that there couldn't possibly be any survivors and urging everyone to retreat. But Hallow pointed toward a nearby building, saying he had seen the silhouette of someone crossing on the other side. It might be a survivor. They rushed over and found a strange creature instead. Hallow wondered if it was even human. The being turned around, revealing that it was feasting on a real human body. It was a monster. The monster spotted them, calling Hallow an interesting piece of meat, and charged forward to attack. Hallow dodged narrowly and ordered Zabi to take the survivors and escape while he held the monster off. The others used fog magic to create a smokescreen and pulled Hallow away, insisting that he shouldn't throw his life away. Zabi scolded him, saying that self-sacrifice was not the same as courage, and warned that he would spank him 100 times if he ever did something like that again. As they moved the 3 survivors to safety, the monster regained its sight by blowing away the fog with its breath. Zabi urged everyone to find a narrow alley to slow the creature down. They kept running as the monster chased them relentlessly, and Hallow muttered in frustration, wondering if the monster was toying with them. Zabi said they had to run as fast as possible toward the teleportation magic circle, and asked Kayla if he could take responsibility for the children. Kayla agreed, assuring him that he had enough power to protect them and requested a suit to assist him. As they continued, they discovered that the road ahead had vanished, and a massive plant root was blocking their path. Pain shouted that if they waited there any longer, the monster behind them would catch up. Kayla quickly prepared his weapon and fired a rope-like projectile that latched onto the other side. Tightening it, he told everyone to use it to cross over. One by one, they made it safely to the other side. Kayla urged them to keep moving, saying they were close to the magic circle and shouldn't look back. Flying ahead, Pain turned around despite his own warning, remarking that even though the monster was huge, it wouldn't be able to jump that far and would have to give up. But to his shock, the monster suddenly leapt across the gap, landing right behind them. It growled that the chase was finally over, forcing everyone to run even faster. Before the monster could reach them, the 3 burrowing creatures from earlier emerged from the ground and started fighting the giant beast. The humans took the opportunity to retreat. The monstrous battle raged behind them as the giant creature easily tore through its opponents. Zabi shouted for Hallow, telling him not to stop and to keep running toward the magic circle. When they finally reached it, Hallow said they should be safe now. Zabi nodded and told everyone to return to the base using the teleportation spell. Exhausted, Pain sighed, saying she just wanted to go home. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Zabi remarked that they had risked their lives so much just to save 3 people, and now they needed to rest. But Kayla suddenly interrupted, saying that there hadn't been only 3 people. It seemed those refugees had been chased by the monster. Zabi and Pain were shocked. Hallow immediately rushed back to check, startling Zabi, who ran after him, shouting for him to stop or he'd punish him later. They soon found a strange creature ahead of them, and Zabi quickly created a distraction so they could hide inside a destroyed house. From there, they saw bizarre, human-like monsters wandering around outside. The group continued rescuing survivors from other worlds until they finally reached their own realm, utterly exhausted. Zabi looked around, worried, and wondered if everyone had made it back safely. A man approached them, asking if everyone was all right, and praised them for managing to save so many people. Zabi, too exhausted to stand, told the others to treat the wounded, give them food, and find them a place to rest. Kayla commented that the situation outside was beyond imagination, and that nowhere in the world was truly suitable for humans to live anymore. Zabi added that he missed the days when their only enemies were demons. Another man hesitantly stepped forward and said that there was an even bigger problem. The king's health had taken a serious turn for the worse. When they went to check, he explained that it wasn't just the king. Several others in the base had suddenly collapsed with similar symptoms. According to the priest, they had never encountered an illness like this before. It might have been a disease brought from another world, and now they were facing mysterious infections spreading across realms. Everyone grew tense as another man pointed out that enemies surrounded them from every direction, and that perhaps humanity was destined for destruction. Pain said that it felt like they were always running from one disaster to another. Hallow agreed, saying that the robots, beasts, and other entities from different worlds were far stronger than the demons they once fought. Despite everything, they had somehow survived until now, though their strength was nothing compared to those monsters. Zabi then called for everyone to gather, including the refugees from the other worlds. He said he wanted to hear about their worlds to understand the situation better and decide what to do next. A man questioned if Zabi was sure about this, reminding him that he had just returned from an expedition and needed rest. But Zabi raised his voice, saying there was no time to rest. As everyone assembled, Zabi looked around at the diverse crowd and said that they all came from different worlds. With a serious expression, he asked them what humanity could do to escape the doomed destiny of destruction. Zabi explained that 13 people from 13 different worlds had been confirmed, and the humans of each world were facing extinction because of their representative threats. He suggested referring to these threats as their natural enemies, and mentioned that the name of each world had already been decided. He then began to share information about the enemies of every world. From the Magic Force world, Zabi stated that their natural enemies were demons, led by a great demon king and 47 subordinate demon kings, who commanded vast armies to take control of almost the entire world. The second world, Kayla, known as the Machine Rule World, had robots as its natural enemies. These machine life forms, originally created by humans, had gone out of control, multiplied without limits, and aimed to wipe out humanity. The third, the Parasite World, faced parasites as their natural enemies, mysterious life forms that had attached themselves to and taken over most of humanity, turning them into puppets. Next came the Giant World, where enormous and incredibly strong giants oppressed ordinary people, enslaving them and despising their existence. The Misfortune World was plagued by calamities, where even a single major one could devastate entire nations and towns, forcing governments to abandon all hope. The Cosmic Devil World's enemies were aliens, while the Wild Green World struggled against the untamed wilderness. In the Neo-Cruelty World, their foes were a new form of humanity itself. The Mad Gods World faced opposition from gods, and the Cursed Destruction World suffered from an all-encompassing curse that consumed their entire realm. In the reincarnation hell world, everything revolved around deadly games. The lawless world had humans as their own natural enemies, and the huge tree world was threatened by the world tree itself. After explaining all 13 types, Zabi concluded that no matter what they did, humanity's insurmountable natural enemies had gathered in a single world. He asked if anyone had any idea or method to overcome such a hopeless situation. The room fell silent, and he realized that each world already struggled with its own overwhelming problems, which had now multiplied many times over. He wondered if there was truly no way forward and whether humanity had no choice but to await its destruction. Hallow, sitting nearby, thought that each natural enemy was powerful enough to rival the demon army. He reflected that the survivors had managed to live only because they had adapted in so many different ways. After a while, Zabi apologized to everyone, admitting that in a world like theirs, they were still trapped in chaos, though some time remained before the inevitable end. Suddenly, Hallow raised his hand and suggested that they could make the natural enemies of each world fight one another. Everyone turned to look at him, and a man mocked the idea, questioning how Hallow could think of something so absurd during a serious meeting, insisting it wasn't a place for childish fantasies. He even wondered who had allowed someone like Hallow to join them. Hallow shouted back, asking to at least let him finish. He explained that he had seen it with his own eyes. It had happened by coincidence, but their actions had triggered different natural enemies to fight among themselves. When Zabi considered his words, he realized that Hallow was right. He remembered that demons, robots, giants, and beasts had indeed fought each other earlier. None of their attacks had worked against humans, but the natural enemies had been able to inflict serious damage on one another. He then acknowledged that using them against each other might actually be a viable strategy. The man from the cosmic devil world called Hallow's idea foolish, while Hallow tried to clarify that he meant they should control the movements of the natural enemies. Those from the Earth Defense Force argued that they had been fighting with all their strength for decades and still hadn't achieved success, since their enemies, the aliens, were overwhelmingly powerful. A man from the giant world stated that Hallow had probably never even seen the kind of enemies they faced. He told Hallow not to speak so carelessly and added that if Hallow were ever surrounded by a horde of giants, he wouldn't be spouting such ridiculous ideas. Another person remarked that their own enemies were comparable to natural disasters, and humans could never hope to control such forces. Everyone began speaking over each other, clearly anxious and defensive, and Hallow was silenced by their reactions. Someone asked Zabi what they should do next. After a moment of thought, Zabi proposed that even if all the other world's enemies joined forces, none of them could rival the demon army. He explained that the others had no idea how terrifying the demons were, as they were the strongest enemies in existence. He pointed out that the humans had survived only because they hadn't yet been exposed to the full might of that threat. Hallow was confused by Zabi's words and wondered what he truly meant. Soon after, a heated argument broke out among the representatives, each claiming that the natural enemy of their world was the strongest. What began as a disagreement turned into a loud quarrel, with people teasing and provoking one another until it nearly escalated into a fight. Suddenly, Zabi interrupted them, stating that what they had just done, making enemies fight enemies, was precisely the concept he had been talking about. Everyone stopped and turned toward him. Kayla questioned whether Zabi meant he had intentionally instigated them into fighting each other. One of the men called it a foolish move, arguing that even if he managed to make them quarrel, their natural enemies were nothing like them and would not be affected by such tactics. Zabi admitted that he hadn't expected a childish trick like that to work on the natural enemies, but he believed that with that small idea, they could still create limited conflicts between those forces. If everyone combined their strength and refined the plan further, the possibility of success, though small, would not be zero. He continued that it didn't matter how ridiculous the plan sounded. Even if it was an outrageous pipe dream, as long as the chance wasn't zero, it was worth giving it a try. He believed that, even in a situation where despair was their only option, it could still be an unparalleled opportunity for them. Kayla described the idea as an extreme approach, yet, even in a world engulfed by chaos, the two brothers were still finding a glimmer of hope to move forward. Hallow reflected that a natural enemy, referred to a predator that was absolute in the natural world, like a bird to an insect or a snake to a frog, and that defeating such an enemy was practically impossible. However, if natural enemies were turned against one another, there might still be a chance to overcome the threat. At that moment, the scene shifted to Kiva, who was fighting a newly discovered robot. He admitted that he was utterly exhausted and needed to report something to Yachi, yet he swore that he wouldn't let Hallow escape the next time. They decided to confront the situation once more. In the Magic Force world, humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction by the overwhelming power of the demons. In desperation, they sought assistance from humans of other worlds and planned to use a massive magic circle to summon the entirety of another world. However, at that very same moment, the people of those other worlds had also devised similar plans, each attempting to reach out for help, but by different means. Kayla explained that they had activated a dimensional gate to seek aid from another world. Another man added that, at first, all they had done was pray, but then something strange had begun to happen. A third person remarked that it might have been triggered by the eruption of a large volcano. Zybe then clarified that all of those immense energies had crossed the boundaries of their dimensions, converging into a single point and pulling everyone together onto one planet. As a result, the various worlds had become intertwined, and along with them came the natural enemies who had tormented humanity across those worlds. A man grew pale with fear, muttering that it was a curse and that they should never have gone against the will of God, as this time they were truly doomed. Zybe, confused by his words, asked what he meant. Another person tried to calm the frightened man down and urged him to explain what had happened. Trembling, the man repeated that they had angered God, and now there was nowhere left to run or hide. Another man commented that every world had its own religion and began to mock the frightened one. However, the next person told him not to laugh, saying that everyone should be free to believe what they wished. A man sitting beside the terrified person tried to calm him down, insisting that God wasn't truly present, but the frightened man shook his head and said it was pointless to speak anything that went against God. Zybe then stated that the situation was unavoidable, and that they would have to use magic to calm the man down. He turned to Wally and instructed him to handle it carefully. Wally agreed to use the spirit piece magic known as magic therapy to calm the man down. Once the man regained his composure, he apologized for losing his temper. Another person from a different world arrived with an injury on his hand, saying that he felt envious of those who had something to believe in and cling to for hope, something not allowed in their own world. He also wondered how much they could really be saved, even if they believed in God. He then asked Zybe about the plan to make their enemies fight among themselves. The man from the cosmic world added that they, too, were curious about it, and believed that Zybe probably had some kind of proposal. Zybe simply smiled, and suggested that they should all work together to find a solution. This angered some of them, and the giant man charged forward, lifting Zybe up in fury, accusing him of mocking them and losing his mind. Although others wanted to intervene, they hesitated because of the giant's intimidating presence. Zybe calmly asked the man to settle down, explaining that everyone was already afraid of the situation. The giant man shouted, asking who was even scared. Hallow stepped in, telling him to stop and demanding that he release Zybe. The giant man, confused, questioned what Hallow was even saying. Hallow then used his strength to grab the man's ankle, making the giant actually feel pain. A lady standing beside the giant man remarked that Hallow's strength couldn't be overpowered by their own warrior, and that he was truly impressive. Zybe then asked Hallow to release the giant man, so the giant man, in turn, let go of Zybe. As Zybe fell, he said that he understood the giant man's anger, but reminded everyone that it was not the time to fight among allies. However, the giant man refused to listen. Suddenly, the lady from the giant side struck Paka with a perfect hit, and introduced herself as Simone from the giant world. The next person to step forward was Brigitte, and it was said that the people of their world were far more hot-headed than others. Paka remarked that everyone was speaking indecisively, and that it was truly shameful to let the enemies fight among themselves. Hallow thought that Paka was saying so because he had never encountered a demon. Paka grew angry, pointing out that Hallow also knew nothing about the giants they had once fought. Brigitte told Paka to apologize, while Hallow clarified that they had indeed fought before. Zybe added that he, too, had experienced being in an inferior position. Pain continued, saying that such situations would always lead to a crushing defeat. Just then, a group from the Magic Force world arrived, led by Gyuta, who asked Zabi if he was busy. Zabi walked toward him and said it was good that they had managed to make it. Gyuta explained that things had deviated slightly from their plan and that some of their people had been attacked by giant plants, which was why they had brought them there. Zabi replied that they were in the middle of a strategy meeting and asked Gyuta to share his insights as well. Major General Garasp arrived soon after, asking if they had found a possible way for humans to survive. Kayla was shocked to see the Major General and immediately saluted him with his team. The general asked if they were from the same world as him. Kayla introduced himself as a member of the Anti-Machine Front, 31st Platoon, and said it was truly good to see that the general was safe. The general saluted them back, saying he was glad to see there were still soldiers from his army who remained in good health. Kayla then asked about the headquarters, and the general replied that they wouldn't be able to reach it anymore. He explained that he had been stationed at Branch Z, but it had been attacked by something other than the robots and was completely destroyed. Thousands of soldiers from that branch were killed, and only a few, including him, had survived and been rescued. Kayla was deeply shocked upon hearing this. Zabi asked if Garasp was someone of great importance, and Kayla explained that Garasp was the general of their anti-machine front, who had led numerous military campaigns against the robots during the war and was regarded as a heroic commander across the world. He added that if they could get his opinion, they might be able to devise a concrete strategy for their current situation. Zabi called Garasp a tactician who was most suited to handle such circumstances and apologized for asking this right after their first meeting. He then requested that Garasp take charge of managing the meetings. Kayla urged Zabi to show some respect, but Garasp agreed to take the role as long as everyone consented. Although no one objected, they quietly expressed their approval, and Zabi remarked that it seemed everyone was in agreement. Pain added that even his hero appeared to have agreed and that they were all counting on Garasp. When Kayla once again asked Zabi to show proper respect, Garasp interrupted, telling him to forget about military ranks since the army they once knew no longer existed. What mattered now, he said, was uniting their strength. He declared that he was no longer a major general, but, as the small one had said, just an old, ordinary man. Kayla accepted his words respectfully. Garasp then stated that he would take command from that point onward and asked for a report on the current situation.